So welcome back. It's a real pleasure and honor to see that we have still 41 participants, even if it's quite late. We had a very intense afternoon of discussion. This is the, we have had 7 panels in today, and we are now approaching the last panel. So I'm very, very happy to launch panel 4 of day 2. This is a panel that is entitled Countering Fraudulent and Corrupt Practices, Risks and Opportunities in the Area of Tax Enforcement. So this will be, a last panel where we will try to look at some potential solutions and recommendations for tax authorities that face all the issues that emerge in 2 days of discussion. So this panel will be chaired by Dr. Slobodan Tomic, who is a lecturer in public management at the University of York. Dear Tomic, the floor is yours.
Hello and good afternoon or good day for you outside Europe. So I'm Slobodan Tomic. I'm a lecturer in public management and public administration in the University of York, UK. So greetings from a sunny York, as you can see from behind me here. So very nice of you, very nice to see so many people staying up this late on a Friday afternoon, or we can call it Friday evening even, right? So I promise you this is the last panel of the conference, but we've got a set of very exciting presentations. So you won't regret staying with us this late, right? So I will briefly announce the 4 presentations, and then I will be reading out the biographies of each of the presenter before the respective presentations. So the first one will be Michael Zammer, the Al Capone alternative, adding tax charges in corruption cases. So there's the first presentation, and then we'll have 3 more. Dr. Italo Borello, detecting fraudulent and corrupt practices, the role of the financial intelligence units. Ksenia Tsipek, the role of compliance risk management system in detection of tax fraud. And Dr. Carlo Lazari, soft skills, the Italian military strategy to combat tax evasion and corruption. So we'll have about 10 minutes for each presentation. So I'll be reminding you 2 minutes before the time is out. So hopefully there won't be any need to cut any of the presentations. So please stick to the time so that we can have about 15 minutes for questions and answers in the closing part of the panel, right? So the first presentation, Michael Zammer. Michael served as an FBI special agent investigating corruption, and before that, white-collar crime. In 2016, Mike was forced out of the FBI after reporting prosecutorial misconduct. He also clerked for a U.S. Court of Appeals judge in between the 2 positions, working on investigations of white-collar crime and corruption. Michael served for 4 years as a Marine Corps infantry officer, and also served in Iraq with the Marines in 2004 and 2005. And as a final note, Michael graduated from Duke University in 1993, and also graduated from Stanford Law School in 2007. Mike, the floor is yours, 10 minutes.
Thank you so much, Dr. Tomic. I really appreciate it, and I don't think I deserve that long of a description, but thank you. And again, it's an honor to be here, an honor to be included in this. And I haven't done any research on the subject, so this presentation is really based upon my experiences investigating corruption. I do have to say that I do not speak for the FBI in any way. So I'm going to share my screen here, and it's so as you said, the presentation is called the Al Capone or Capone alternative, which is obviously based upon the famous Chicago mobster's experience, where he was reportedly responsible for many severe crimes, but then actually was only ever, well, the most serious crime he was convicted of was tax evasion. And of course, there's an important lesson for people who investigate corruption and try to hold corrupt actors accountable about how we can use tax charges when we, in the course of our investigations and prosecutions. And so there are obvious advantages to using tax charges. The first is that illicit income is rarely reported. Corrupt public officials just do not like to say on their tax return that they took a $10,000 bribe. So that leaves us with a pretty good opening to have a potential tax charge. Also, at least our perception was that tax charges were more easily proven. The intent is different. You just have to show that there's an intent to evade taxes or file a false tax return, as opposed to an intent for them to be influenced in their official duties, as you have in bribe charges. And then, of course, you don't necessarily have to show that the source of income itself was illegal, simply that they received it. And then also our perception is, was that there's a fear of the tax man. We used to joke that people were more afraid of the Internal Revenue Service, the IRS, than they were of the FBI. Here's a great example of a case that we had in New Orleans. The former mayor, he was, as you can see here, he was charged with a series of corruption crimes, various forms of bribery, money laundering, and the honest services fraud, which is a version of bribery. And then you see at the end, tax charges. And so tax charges, in a lot of ways, the way I like to say it is that they act as a fail-safe. In Louisiana, there has been a history of some popular public officials being acquitted at trial, or at least having a hung jury and not being convicted. And so prosecutors feel more comfortable having that fail-safe, a tax charge, because at least the perception is that a jury that may not be willing to convict a popular public official of corruption or bribery may be willing to convict them of taxes. And so here, Nagin's failure to report or file, include his bribe payments on his tax return were the basis for the charge of filing a false tax return. Nagin was ultimately convicted of the corruption charges as well as the tax charges. Now, there are certain disadvantages to using tax charges. And again, this comes from the perspective of someone who investigated corruption. And actually, the FBI doesn't have the authority to investigate tax violations, or actually to bring the tax violations to prosecutors. So at least our biggest problem was having to involve the IRS. And, I'm not trying to criticize the IRS, but with a second agency, you get a second bureaucracy, a second set of regulations, and a second chain of command. And, the IRS also doesn't like to share information. There are certain statutory requirements that the IRS has to keep tax information secret. It wasn't a big problem, but it nonetheless, makes it more difficult to work tax charges. There are also in the United States, at least different levels of approval. So tax charges or federal tax charges have to be approved in Washington, D.C., which is obviously much more difficult than just a local U.S. attorney's office that we have in, say, pretty much every major city in the United States, just making their own prosecutorial decisions. Also, there's an over-reliance on the relative ease of tax charges, and also there's a potential for abuse. And so one way to mitigate the disadvantages, particularly with the second agency, was to use task forces. And I think we saw that brought up earlier today in the conference in the UK, for example. In the United States, we do the same thing, which is we'll have the IRS agents working directly with the FBI agents on corruption cases. And this is an example of a case that I worked. This was a sheriff in Louisiana who we found had actually committed hundreds of thousands of dollars of fraud. We had a very strong fraud case. We brought that to the prosecutors. The federal prosecutors, wanting to have that fail-safe charge, included the IRS and asked the IRS to develop the tax charges. Fortunately, we had an IRS agent on the task force who I knew very well, and he did a fantastic job. He quickly navigated through the IRS and Justice Department bureaucracy, and ultimately, the sheriff pleaded guilty to fraud and bribery. The one drawback was that the IRS management actually complained about the plea agreement. And so there was some resistance at the end from the IRS about whether or not they wanted to include tax charges. Ultimately, the prosecutors didn't listen to them, but again, it showed some of the drawbacks of, again, having that second agency. This is another example of where where prosecutors can be over-reliant on tax charges or financial crimes. This guy, Mike Cotton, was an investigator for a district attorney's office, and he was asking for and receiving sexual bribes. Strangely, when the FBI brought the case to the federal prosecutors, the first federal prosecutor on the case actually told the FBI to try to develop tax charges against this official asking for sexual favors. And of course, sex is obviously not taxable income, so it really didn't make any sense. And it's really just an example of how, unfortunately, prosecutors who are used to having the relative ease of tax charges can become too reliant on them. And so it's important for prosecutors to continue to be competent in using all of the various charges that they have available to them. And then finally, this last example is, in some ways I'm presenting in opposition to my own presentation, but this guy was a chief deputy sheriff in a parish, or what we call a county in Louisiana. And as you can see here, he was only charged for tax crimes. It was an unusual case because actually he was originally investigated for a potential corruption issue. He and his boss, the sheriff, were both investigated for an unusual business arrangement where they were collecting commissions off of sales between two companies. Neither of the companies had any business with the sheriff's office. It certainly looked suspicious. And so the business relationship was investigated. Again, neither were charged with corruption crimes, but Tefero here was charged with tax crimes. And it sort of raises a question of fairness because, tax crimes can be, or tax violations can be enforced through criminal charges or through civil enforcement proceedings. But here the prosecutors decided to go after him with a tax charge, and he was ultimately convicted and is now a convicted felon, for the rest of his life. And again, it raises the question of whether this was fair and whether tax charges are being overused. But that is all I have, and thank you for including me, and I look forward to any questions in the question and answer section.
Thanks, Michael. Thank you very much for these very interesting case studies, let's say. So I've got a few questions, but I'll ask them later during the Q&A session. So we will now move to the second presentation by Dr. Italo Borella. So the title of the presentation is Detecting Fraudulent and Corrupt Practices, the Role of the Financial Intelligence Units. And a little bit about Dr. Borella. He's a director at the Bank of Italy. He graduated in law with cum laude in 1989 and earned a PhD in organization and functioning of public administrations. He was a contract professor at the University of Viterbo, 1998 to 2002. He joined the Bank of Italy in 1994, where since 2008, he has served in the Financial Intelligence Unit. In this role, Dr. Borella has been dealing with the prevention and fight against money laundering, corruption, and tax evasion. He's involved in various international fora and working groups in the profession, and as evaluator in teams for the assessment of the anti-money laundering CFT systems. He also represents the Financial Intelligence Unit as an expert in conferences and seminars, both at international and domestic level. Dr. Borella, the floor is yours. 10 minutes.
Thank you so much for this comprehensive presentation, and thank you for the opportunity I have today to contribute to this panel by expressing some thoughts from the point of view of an anti-money laundering preventive authority. The previous panels showed how close are the relations between corruption and tax frauds that are among the most significant crimes generating proceeds to be laundered. And that are also means by which organized crime can infiltrate public activities can influence public choices in that state capture that has been recalled in the previous panels. Links between organized crime, corruption, tax frauds, and money laundering can be represented as a vicious circle where each of them is strictly depending from the others. And so this phenomena require to implement, in addition to the instruments offered by the criminal law, also preventive tools aimed at keeping the economic and financial system safe from any illicit infiltration. The preventive measures designed by the FATF at the OECD, the customer due diligence, including the obligations to verify the identity of the beneficial owners, that is fundamental to make legal persons and arrangements sufficiently transparent. Record keeping and suspicious transaction reporting call a wide range of operators to cooperate with the anti-money laundering authorities in promoting the integrity of the system. Customer due diligence in particular and record keeping are closely related to the duty to report suspicious transactions. The anomalies that can be drawn from customer or transactions, lack of consistency between customers' profile and his financial behavior, as well as anomalies referable to the characteristics of the transactions, must be promptly brought to the attention of the FIUs, competent to carry out the financial analysis of transactions suspected to be linked to possible money laundering, but I would like to highlight suspected to be linked to any other associated predicate offenses. The FIUs, due to their main features referring to specialized functions of financial analysis, independence and operational autonomy, access to a wide range of information of different nature, capacity to cooperate at domestic and international level, are in a crucial position in the anti-money laundering national systems to help also reporting entities in detecting suspicious activities, and on the other hand, to support with their financial analysis targeted investigations and prosecutions. I would like to highlight some evidences from the FIU Italy's experience. FIU Italy has just today morning presented the annual report on the activity performed in 2021. In 2021, the FIU received more than 139,000 STRs. In 2008, the year when the FIU started to operate, the STRs were just 12,000. The growing trend of STRs, suspicious transaction reports, did coincide with a general increase in their quality, thanks to the FIU's activity aimed at ensuring direct assistance, promoting meetings with the reporting entities, providing feedback on the results of the reports, drawing up and issuing anomaly indicators, models, scheme and patterns of anomalous conduct, and a series of communications to draw the attention of the obliged entities on particular illicit behaviors, especially in recent years linked to the relevant public initiatives in support of the economy after the pandemic. With this activity, we are in general able to detect and extract from the huge flow of STRs specific typologies. Tax offenses maintain a prominent role, 17% of the total STRs. Together with STRs, we can potentially refer to contexts of organized crime, 16%, also identified in cooperation with the National Anti-Mafia Directorate. Suspicions of corruption and appropriation of public funds continue to represent a major component of the reported operations. especially when linked to crimes that tend to exploit the emergency measures in support of the economy. We also experienced the high ability of criminals to take advantage of all the opportunities arising from the emergency legislation relating to the interventions after the pandemic. In a significant number of reports, almost 4,200, the presence of politically exposed persons emerged. In these cases, the risk-based approach requires particular attention in the analysis and development of all available elements. So, taking into account the above, I would like to highlight some elements, the most challenging elements from the current scenario. The FIU model all over the world, it is clearly recognized the relevance of the FIUs as central agencies with core functions of prevention of the economies and financial markets, a high degree of operational independence and autonomy, a strong specialization in the financial analysis. Both at the FATF and at the regional level, such as European Union, the main challenge is to pursue the maximum of harmonization in FIU's powers, status, capacity, in order to uniform the framework in which the FIUs are called to operate and also to exchange information with each other. This is what the European Union is pushing with the creation of an anti-money laundering European authority that will have supervisory functions and will host a mechanism for support and coordination of the FIU's national activities. Second item, the relevant efforts made by many FIUs in years, including FIU Italy, to provide concrete tools to help the reporting entities in the detection of specific suspicious activities. This can develop a widespread anti-money laundering culture in the economic and financial system. The increase in the number of STRs is an example of this growing awareness. Third, the role of the reporting entities, taking into account the main objective of a preventive system, that is to not only to detect crimes, but firstly to maintain the economy and the financial system safe from any illicit infiltration. Countries should also consider the opportunity to extend the number of anti-money laundering obliged entities, to enlarge the range of operators able to intercept anomalous behavior. Okay, I'm concluding. Thank you, Slobodan. For example, by including public entities that perform administrative functions in sectors particularly exposed to corruption and criminal infiltration, such as procurement or the granting of financial aids. This is one of the most challenging areas for Italy, where, according to the anti-money laundering legislation, some public administrations are required to provide the FIU with specific communications concerning suspicious transactions. The last two items I would like to highlight are the following. The growing integration, the increasing integration between preventive systems. The FIU's role is clearly recognized even outside the anti-money laundering apparatus, also in the tax apparatus. I would recall the task force on tax crime at the OECD, where the FIUs are recognized as important actors, and also in the context of the anti-corruption exercises. And last one, a common language. The correct implementation of anti-money laundering measures not only increases the cost of any attempt to infiltrate the economy, but also helps to promote a common language with notions that concretely shape the structure, the functioning of jurisdictions. Concepts such as that of beneficial owner, born in the context of the anti-money laundering apparatus, extend their scope, their meaning, and became currently used also in other regulatory areas, from anti-corruption to tax to corporate and financial sector, thus representing a common conceptual standard of reference relating to transparency of the systems. Thank you so much for your attention.
Thank you, Dr. Borella. Excellent timekeeping. A very interesting presentation. Interesting to hear about the increasing emphasis on inter-organizational collaboration, shall we call it. So look forward to the questions later. I'm sure that attendees will definitely want to hear more about that. Now, the next presentation is by Ksenia Tsipek. So welcome, Ksenia. The topic of the presentation is the role of compliance risk management system in detection of tax fraud. Ksenia Tsipek is an international tax expert who has 25 years of experience of working at the Ministry of Finance Tax Administration of the Republic of Croatia. She was extensively involved in lawmaking with responsibilities for several tax reforms in Croatia. She's currently head of the tax risk analysis and the future development of compliance risk management, CRM systems, board advisor of the European Network for Economic Cooperation, a contributor member of the Blockchain Chamber of Commerce in the USA, and a member of a government blockchain association, GBA. And last but not least, a lecturer at the Faculty of Law of the University of Zagreb, right? So Ksenia, the floor is yours, 10 minutes.
So thank you very much for the invitation. It is really my pleasure to be with you today and with my estimate colleagues. So about my presentation today, I will share the screen. It's about the compliance risk management role in detecting tax fraud. So we can see that tax administrations today have a lot of challenges, but one of the most important thing is increasing trust and building partnership with the compliant taxpayers. But also we are aware of the more and more sophisticated, speedy and cross-border tax frauds, and also the reduction of the time frame regarding the exchange of information between countries. I think that's the crucial. Also, to fight against tax frauds, we have to have tools. So one of them is compliance risk management system. It works in Croatia since 2018, and part of this system is automatic VAT refund. The system shown us how important is such a risk analysis system, especially in the global pandemic. That means that taxpayers got their VAT refund in the 30 days, which is the deadline prescribed by law, without any manual work, if the system recognize these taxpayers as a fully compliant. So compliance risk management system scores behavior of the taxpayers and identifies gradations of risky behavior. Why? So enables mass-based detection of types of risky behavior, increases taxpayers' trust in the tax administration, that's very important today, and increases compliance with the tax law, establishes uniform procedures. That means that, for example, if you need any information, or if you need your VAT refund or any other tax matters, you will get the same information and same tax procedures, no matter what regional tax office is your tax office. So these systems actually increase our uniform procedures. Optimization of repressive instruments as tax audits, enforcement, and internal risk behavior, tax authorities, officials, and auditors is also part of the system. So we can monitoring if is some not correct or suspicion situations from our employees. So if they work what they have to do or something they don't do, so we can correct this their behavior also. So in the cycle of the life cycle of CRMS, I will emphasize data warehouses. So everything is based on the data. So we collect data from many different sources. So is this a third part or from the information, automatic exchange information for European Union, or any other source from the different institutions. And of course, very important is to build composite models. So for example, if we have 600 or 700 different risks for every tax area, so that means that we have different composite models for every of those tax areas. And for example, for VAT is few of them, several composite models. And of course, if you put some taxpayers through all 700 risks, you will get the score. But this score will be not exactly correct. It's much more correct if you put in special composite models for example, VAT or corporate income tax or other taxes. Evaluation is also very important for us. So we have to evaluate the system, and information from the tax audit department, from the tax fraud departments are very important for us. This give us opportunity that we make and build some better risks and new risks. So this communication is, and this sharing the data is very important for whole system. So data management, of course, data warehouse is the basis of compliance risk management system, and of course the data quality. But also we don't collect the data because only to have a data. So we have to use the data, especially data which is in the data warehouse. Otherwise, it would be much more administrative burden on the taxpayers. Data from bank accounts are very important if we are looking in the tax frauds, and data and cooperation with anti-money laundering department is very important in the field of tax fraud. And so we have this communication, and especially with our department for tax frauds, so that this tool gives us opportunity to recognize high-risk taxpayers and taxpayers who are in the criminal water. And if you look at in the Croatian example, so we have fully compliant taxpayers, so there is no specific measures, and we can monitoring them on a partner base. So there is not necessary to trigger the tax audit, which is most important instrument in the tax administration. And they will got, for now, they will got automatic VAT refund without any manual work. So non-compliant, if they are less compliant, so we have specific prescribed uniform measures by the type of tax officials, and also for the medium non-compliant taxpayers, and that means that these measures are the same in all countries. So no matter which regional office regional office is involved. But if the taxpayers, if the system recognizes that the taxpayers is non-compliant, then they will sent in a tax audit department. That's not mean that the audit will be triggered immediately, but there is the analysis more, but usually they trigger the tax audit. Also, as I spoke before about the special composite models in the field of VAT fraud, we have special composite models for missing traders if we are in the field of VAT, conduit, broker, dubious. So we build special composite models for large taxpayers department for tax fraud, audit department, enforcement department. For example, a composite model for income based on the difference in the value of assets and the amount of funds with which they were acquired. That's very important composite model. Sometimes the taxpayers has to prove the source of the money for his assets, and we built different risks how to recognize these taxpayers. In the field, for example, in the field of tax enforcement, that's composite models for tax debtors to checks, tax debtors to enforcement, tax debtors to warning. And detection of internal risks, so behavior of our employees, is very important, and this system gives us opportunity that we monitor that also. Also, benefits are classification of taxpayers in predefined risk categories based on their behavior, recognizing the taxpayers who have preference to risk. So, to the process of developing predictive analysis. So, predictive analysis or advanced analysis, predictive or prescriptive, are really a step forward, and this is some pilot project, and we would like to stop the risk and to recognize the risk before this risk really happened. And of course, transparency is very important in this system. So the system not depends, give us opportunity that we don't depend on some human do or not to do, that system works for give us information about the risky taxpayers, but also with about the taxpayers who are fully compliant. Advanced analytics, as I said, this is the step forward. We have to prevent the situation that some tax fraud happened. And of course, the quality compliance risk management system, as I said, through the composite models, as it works in Croatia, give us opportunity to prevent the tax fraud and recognize the tax fraud and timely work on that. And we think that the system is digitalization gave us opportunity to build the system, and without this system our work will be much more harder, and it will be very I would say much more harder to recognize the taxpayers who can be in criminal water. I could say that. So thank you very much.
So quite fascinating to hear about the tools that you're developing for risk management and identification of risk. All right, so the final presentation for today, Dr. Carlo Lazari. So soft skills, the Italian military strategy to combat tax evasion and corruption. So Carlo Lazari holds a PhD from the University of Campania, Luigi Vanvitelli, SME University of Sassari. I hope I pronounced that well, but please correct me. He's captain of Guardia di Finanza, and that is the Italian military police force with general economic and financial crime fighting competencies. Dr. Lazari is currently commander of the Olbia group in Sardinia, and he defended a thesis focused on the substantial profiles of the Italian criminal tax law system. Dr. Lazari, the floor is yours.
Counter tax evasion and fraud is the primary objective of the Guardia di Finanza, pursued through flexible operational modules which favor the use of the investigative tools typical of a police force. In this context, the departments carry out police investigation as well as autonomous checks using the inspection powers provided for by the tax laws. Guardia di Finanza not only exercise the power of access, inspections, and verification, also carries out financial and banking investigation useful for reconstructing the flows of money and other financial instruments. This investigative projection represents the characterizing element of operational action of a police corps, which systematically values for tax purposes the information acquired in various sectors of the institutional mission, from judicial police investigation, that is what we can call a military strategy, based on soft skills, in other terms, on the capacity of use every kind of information whenever it could come from. Guardia di Finanza, through projects and analysis developed by special departments, trains the use of target controls every day, based on the appropriate and complete use of the elements contained in the database available, in order to concentrate its operational action towards phenomena of more serious fraud, minimizing obstacles to the normal conduct of taxpayers and economic activity. The efficiency of the investigative model just described, based on a constant and widespread economic control of territory, was recently confirmed by the important results achieved in the search of assets related to the Russian oligarchs subject to the so-called freezing measures. The theme of the crisis in Ukraine prompts me to affirm that today the European Union is faced with the opportunity to push for a more transparent, integrated, and truly progressive fiscal model that will erase the problem of tax competition between nations at the root, and model of functioning economic democracy capable of inspiring future and new regional political unions all over the world. The risk is that of a progressive increase in inequalities and reduction in safety, according to the inequality instability equation. While we are thinking of including new states in the European Union, we cannot forget that the identity reactions favored by the financial and economic crisis can potentially cause the political disintegration of the European project, and more generally, a pauperization of political power. An efficient and redistributive economic policy is the only way out of the current statement, and is the most serious defense against the increasing attractiveness of alternative models, such as the Chinese and the Russian ones. The European Union must use this situation and exploit it as a driving force in order to regain its role on the international stage. Europe, UK, and the United States are called upon to jointly combat financial opacity and uncontrolled concentration of assets. The risk of an oligarchic drift in the West increases day by day. This phenomenon appears impossible and actually predictable at the time. It is necessary to overcome the political fragmentation and take action against tax havens. Even if it does not seem that, this is exactly the moment to put the tax issue at the center of the debate, which is the only real lever to allow the survival of our social and democratic model. Thank you. This is all for my place.
Right. Okay, so thank you very much, Dr. Lazari. Can you hear me? I guess you can hear me all. So some issues on my side. Yeah. Right. Okay. So I think we can move on. So thanks again for the interesting presentation. In the interest of time, I'll try to make this as efficient as possible. So we've got about 10 minutes for your questions. So feel free to raise your hand if you have a question. And we've had already one question announced in the chat box. So Costa, right?
Yes, thank you very much, Slobodan. And I have a question. I would like here to use for a few minutes the expertise and most important, the brain of Italo for trying to understand a data that sometimes speaks more than, you know, other things. So what happens was that in our investigation, we realized that in a system like UK, where law firms and accountancy firms are very regulated, and they're supposed to send out suspicious activity reports because are part of the regulated sector, of course, there is a huge discrepancy in the amount of this SAR that come out. In particular, for example, the NCA statistic of 2020 says that even if we had an increase of 20% of the suspicious activity reports that reached the incredible number of almost 500,000 in 1 year, the 75% of these reports were filed by banks. And somebody, of course, said that this is can be a sort of techniques of hiding things in plain sight, submerging, you know, the regulator of, you know, so many, you know, reports, it's impossible to find things. So hiding the needle in the haystack. On the opposite level, and this is quite interesting, is that accountants and tax advisors, we have in the UK 350,000 members. They filed only 5,000 SARs, that is 1.5% of them. And if you look at the independent legal professional, 200,000 solicitors, again, only 1.5% of them you know, submitted it. And this is a bit, for me, going, it's a sort of contradiction in logical terms with the evidence that we have in this project, that when there is money laundering, when there is a tax evasion, there is always an enabler, and the neighbor is always an accountant or a lawyer. So my question, Italy, is what's happening here? There is something that doesn't, you know, if you use mathematics, something doesn't count well.
Thank you, Costa, for your question. You have touched a very critical point, and it is an issue we face as FIU, also in Italy. I must say that the most relevant number of STRs come to the FIU from a bank and other financial institutions. We have used all our instruments of communications, of giving input and growing awareness in other categories of obliged entities, and in particular in favor of professionals. But we have to be conscious that this is an issue for all the FIUs, for the anti-money laundering systems. If we think at the legal privileges that characterize the most important professional activities. We know that solicitors, lawyers in general, are protected from are prevented to send suspicious transactions. In any case, they are representing their customers, their clients in proceedings, in civil or criminal proceedings. In these cases, they are not obliged to send suspicious transactions. We are experiencing in Italy a growing awareness in some categories of professionals, such as notaries, that are more aware of their duties, maybe due to their role, their public role in the Italian system. As regards accountants, I know this is a big issue for many jurisdictions, and the challenge is to give more inputs to these categories in order to increase their awareness. But the meeting we have regularly with categories of professionals encourage us to continue on this, because there are some instruments they can use to send STRs in a secure way, and even without indicating the name of the sender, of the single professional, the single accountant sending the report, just going through their association, their self-regulatory body. So you touched a very critical point, but we are trying to face also this issue.
Thank you very much.
Yeah. Thanks. We've got 5 more minutes. Anyone else with a question? So as we wait, then if I may, I just kind of briefly to say that it seems to me, so there are 3 cross-cutting themes across this presentation. So one, data sharing systems. Another one is the institutional design that enables collaboration between various institutions. And the third one is collaborative practices. So depending on personal skills, but also norms, such as cultural norms. So I think 3 very interesting themes emerging. So I've got just a quick question for Michael. So you mentioned in your cases, so we saw some examples of failed collaboration or kind of insufficient collaboration, so between the FBI and prosecutors or IRS and other institutions, or interinstitutional collaboration which could be enhanced. So my question is, to what extent can the legal system, so the institutional design, be amended to foster interinstitutional collaboration? And to what extent is this just a question of personal habits, let's say, of prosecutors or institutional tradition, the way things were being done in the past and so on? So where do you see room for progress?
You know, you really asked the wrong question, because it's one of my favorite topics. So it's so I could go on for a long time about this, but I think with prosecutors in particular, we have a big problem. Just to give a short answer, at the federal level in the United States, federal prosecutors are not really held accountable at all. When they don't take a case, the public never knows it. And by contrast, in the state system, like in the state of Louisiana, the New Orleans Police Department will arrest somebody, and then they make the arrest, and the district attorney's office, who prosecutes state crimes, will, either prosecute the case or not. And so there's a public record that shows when prosecutors are taking cases and when they're not. And then the public can hold both of those institutions accountable. And that just doesn't happen at the federal level because the federal agencies don't arrest people unless the prosecutors are going to prosecute them. And so the prosecutors really just decide for themselves what cases to take. And so I think there just needs to be much more transparency over the Department of Justice through whistleblower protections and other like transparency laws.
Thanks for the answer. So the incentives, the way their structure could be changed through enhanced transparency among the other measures. All right, so 1 more minute. Any quick question before we wrap up and move on to the concluding remarks, the last 15 minutes of the conference? No. So if I may just quickly for Ksenia, so what is the role of the data protection ecosystem, let's say, in enabling or hindering the development of the risk management system?
Well, if we are talking about the data protection, it's really most important thing of whole system, because the compliance risk management system is based on the data. So data has to be protected on the highest level. But also analyzing data is the process which are continuously day by day. So we can find the sources for the new data very often. And as I said, I think that we have to share data between the tax authorities much faster, and I will say in the real time. So we saw last year, I think, the first exchange of data between tax authorities between Finland and Estonia in the real time. So I think that's the step forward. Otherwise, we will be too slow for any kind of tax frauds and especially corruption.
Right. Thank you very much for the answer. Now, unfortunately, we have to conclude the panel. So Costa, I'm gonna hand it over to you. I just wanted briefly to say thank you all for your fascinating presentations, and thanks to the attendees for staying up this late on a Friday afternoon, evening. Yeah, thanks for your attention, and I hope that you've enjoyed the panel. So Costa, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Slobodan, for moderating this panel. Thank you, Michael, Italo, Ksenia, and Carlo for being with us. It has been a real honor, and hopefully we will meet each other soon. So now...